Hi, welcome to this training video for those of you that are interested in putting together a 3-minute thesis presentation. My name's Steve Seidel. I'm currently a faculty member within the College of Liberal Arts in the Department of Psychology and Sociology. But a few years back, I was a faculty fellow within the College of Graduate Studies, and Joanne Canales and I brought the 3-minute thesis to TAMU CC, and I was mainly in charge of putting that thing together. So I have, as a result, I've seen hundreds upon hundreds, I would say, 3-minute thesis presentations. I attended regional competitions and so on to see who's winning those things. So I'd like to at least give you my take on how to put these things together. All right. So first of all, let's talk about the concept and what it is. As you can read here, the 3-minute thesis competition is a research communication competition developed by the University of Queensland in Australia in 2008. The premise of the competition is to develop academic, presentation, and research communication skills. It supports the development of students' capacity to effectively explain their research in a language appropriate to an intelligent but non-specialist audience, which you'll see becomes kind of key to putting these things together. Graduate students have 3 minutes, right, to present compelling orations of their dissertation topics or thesis topics and their significance. 3MT is not an exercise in watering down research, but forces students to consolidate their ideas and concisely explain their research discoveries. Okay. As far as the rules go, right, you have a single static PowerPoint slide that you can use. It can't do anything special. It just kind of sits up there while you're presenting your talk, right? So no animations or transitions, no movement of any kind, no sound, anything like that. The slide is to be present at the beginning of the talk and be up there the whole time. No additional electronic media is allowed. No additional props, so costumes, musical instruments, laboratory equipment are permitted. Presentations are limited to 3 minutes maximum, and competitors exceeding 3 minutes are disqualified. Now keep in mind, some of you might get there right at the end, and you might be something like, and I just want to thank all the judges or something like this. If that's what you do and go over, I don't think we'll penalize you for that. But I'm not the judge. Okay, so their decisions are final. So presentations are to be spoken word, right? So you can't sing, can't rap, you can't do poetry. The presentations are to commence from the stage, so you can't go running around the crowd. Presentations are considered to have commenced when the presenter starts their presentation through either movement or speech. Now keep in mind, we'll have a 3-minute timer. You'll have access to that timer while you put together your talk as well, so you can get real practice as to how you're going to keep track of time. Okay, so and finally, remember, the decision of the panel is final. Okay, so once the judges have made their call, you have to live with it. Okay, so one more rule. Okay, and just to be clear, because sometimes people don't quite get this, but no notes of any kind are permitted in 3MT, right? So you can't go up there with a note card and hope to give your talk, right? That you should know this talk so well, it's only 3 minutes long, that you don't need notes, okay? I'm going to talk about it in a way that you're trying to really turn this thing into a conversation that you have with your audience. And if you get to that point, hopefully you won't even think of needing notes, but it does take a lot of practice. Okay, so what are you judged on? You can see these two areas, and for comprehension and content, which is kind of what you would expect, right? Did the presentation provide an understanding of the background to the research question being addressed and its significance? Did the presentation clearly describe the key results of the research, including conclusions and outcomes? Did the presentation follow a clear and logical sequence? Was the thesis topic, key results, and research significance and outcomes communicated in a language appropriate to a non-specialist audience? Did the speaker avoid scientific jargon, explain terminology, and provide adequate background information to illustrate points? And did the speaker spend adequate time on each element of their presentation, or did they elaborate too long in one area, or did it appear that the presentation was rushed? Okay, so yeah, content. That's pretty typical of what you would expect from any presentation. Okay, in addition, you're judged upon engagement and communication, right? So how well did you keep that audience riveted, right? So did the oration, right, make the audience want to know more? Was the presenter careful not to trivialize or generalize their research? Did the presenter convey enthusiasm for the research? Did the presenter capture and maintain the audience's attention? Did the speaker have sufficient stage presence, eye contact, vocal range, maintain a steady pace, and have a confident stance? And did the PowerPoint slide enhance the presentation? Was it clear, legible, concise? We're going to see that most of those slides are just pictures that are related in some way to your talk. Okay, so it's important to take some time to choose that. But a lot of times they don't even contain a single word. All right, so let's talk about designing those talks, right? So after looking at a lot of these talks, what I've really kind of distilled these things down to is they contain about 6 ingredients, right? So this is kind of my little cookbook recipe for designing a 3MT talk. And what those parts are, I have listed right here, right? So you'll open up with something that we'll call the hook, which you'll introduce the topic of study in a way that grabs the audience's attention, right? You absolutely don't want to start a talk with going, research has found blah, 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 right? Your audience is asleep before you hit the second word. Instead, involve them in what you're saying, and we'll talk about ways to do that. Okay. Second, you need to talk about the problem, and get there, pretty quickly after you get through your hook there, and it might actually be kind of part of your hook, right? But these things should flow. So the next part is really describing what the problem is that you were researching, right? So convey the problem in the audience in a term they can understand and appreciate its importance. If you've done it right, they pretty much would know what your research question is before you even state it. But still, let's go to the next one, right? The next part is actually that research question, right? It's really important to have that crystal clear. If I could redo the way journals work, I would love to I wish articles would come with that research question just spelled out rather than having to search for it. Seems kind of a ridiculous thing to have to do. But that's the way life is. Okay, so anyway, research question. Your problem description should lead to an obvious statement of your research question, right? So make sure that's crystal clear. And once again, it should be something that the audience can clearly see, understand, right? It's going to really shape everything else to come. Okay, so you got your research question. Now it's time to really talk about methodology, what you do, but you don't have time to do much in terms of methodology because a lot of these things, you might have done 2 or 3 different studies. You're not going to have time to describe each one. So in general, you need a much broader kind of approach. What did you do, right? Describe your approach to answering those research questions, right? From there, we, of course, are in the results section of like a paper, but discovery. So what did you find out, right? What conclusions did you make? The audience doesn't want to hear stats, but they do want to know what you found. And in most cases, right, you might have found quite a bit of things, but you don't have time to describe everything. So you really need to distill this down into the big findings, right? once you're there, you're running out of time. So you need to relate this back to the big picture, right? So go for that big picture ending, okay? And namely, that's kind of think about how your research will change the world, right? And you might not think of it that way, but it really has, right? In some small way. So see if you can find out and get excited about that part, right? Remember, passion is part of this. So let's go through and look at each one of these sections kind of individually. All right. So yeah, going back to the hook, right? You want to grab the audience right from the start by starting with something that almost everyone is interested in, perhaps to hook them into your presentation. So I advise you to take a look at 3MT winning presentations on the internet and explore the wide range of hooks that others have used effectively. The idea, right, is to build a bridge between the everyday experience of your audience and the more academic material that you plan to present. Okay, so in a way, you want it packed full of probably entertainment value, but mainly you want to capture the attention of the audience. So once again, do not say research has shown blah, 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 right? Instead, you might start with putting the audience, right, in the situation that you're going to talk about by having them imagine themselves in a setting. So you kind of go, imagine that you were the only one in this room or something like this, right? You would go, once they can imagine themselves there, right, in your talk, you kind of got them. You have them grabbed. Okay, so the other things you can do, it's totally legal to ask people questions. Okay, so don't hesitate. Ask them questions. You're allowed to get them involved, right? Just don't get them too involved because they will be taking up time as well, right? Maybe some simple one-word answers would suffice. Okay. If you're kind of wondering about hooks, I'm going to show you an example, but you can always, for any elements of these presentations, go to 3-Minute Thesis, the 3-Minute Thesis site, which is, of course, at the University of Queens. I have a link to it right here in this video. And take a look at what's there. You'll be able to view dozens upon dozens of winning talks in there, and take a look at how they actually start their talks. If you can't think of a way on your own, my guess is looking at others should give you some ideas. All right. Next, the problem, right? So after hooking the audience, you'll be ready to describe the problem that you chose to tackle. So note that this is not your research question, but is the big picture version of it. So it's important to convey why this problem is important. Right? And big picture stuff really is easier to follow for your audience and really understand importance than talking about things on a very small scale. So more specifically, why it should be important to the audience is what you want to convey, right? So if there's terminology that needs to be defined for your research question, it should be done here, but avoid the use of jargon that your audience will not understand. All right, so your audience has kind of a big picture idea of a problem that exists, and now your research question, right? So it's time to tell them where you come into the story, right? Because this is your research. This is where you enter this picture. So what question are you trying to answer through your work? Be sure that you state this in a way that's understandable to the audience, and any terms that needed to be defined should have already been defined, right, while describing the problem. This will likely be a very short piece of your presentation, right? It's just a question, but it's really critical because it marks the transition between problem and approach. Okay, so a clearly stated research question just makes your presentation much, much easier for the audience to follow. All right. So we got a research question, right? So now we're on to the approach you took to answer that question. So you just stated your research question. The audience is begging to hear what you chose to do to answer this question, and time permitting, why you chose that approach. Don't forget, um, don't forget who you are talking to at this point. Keep the description of your approach methods as simple as possible. If your methods were complicated, this is where you might want to use something on your slide to help you convey that information. So if something, and it doesn't just have to be a method, but if there's some part that really is tough, right, to get audience to understand, then it begs for a visual. And you may want to use your slide that way, right? And it really just depends on the talk. So after hearing your approach, the audience should be able to foresee the possible outcomes of your investigation, right? So they don't have to guess at what your hypotheses are, probably, if they know your research question and they have a little background. So then you're on to the discovery, right? What did you find? So time to tell the audience what you found and what conclusions you made. You won't have time to tell them all the details, so stick to the major findings, which should include the most interesting ones, right? When you consider a result interesting, make sure that you explain why it's interesting, because your audience might not quite understand that. So be excited about this section. Your passion should peak, right, with discoveries, right? Because this is the fun part of research. Even if you don't find something, there's still passion, right? So you might have a talk where you didn't find a darn thing, but you're very disappointed, and make it sound like that, okay? So I think it helps. The big picture, right? So you're in the home stretch, right? It's time to bring your talk full circle. So if you know anything about circular writing, you want the ending to be related to how you start. So if you can do that, it's kind of a nice little style, okay, reminder. So return to the big picture problem you started with, right? And end with a grand statement of how your research or research agenda may or will change the world. So if you can put that in a nutshell and end with that big statement, right? There you go. I think you get bonus points anytime you can relate that right back to the very beginning of your talk, right? So take a look at what you want to end with and what you want to begin with, and try your best to make those very related elements of your talk. Okay. For what I've seen in terms of 3MT, these are probably the most common mistakes that students make. Number one, students fail to connect their research to the big picture. So they get kind of lost, and the audience gets lost as well. Just, I don't know if it's so much lost, but they get disinterested because they can't really see the purpose of why anyone is doing this kind of research. Okay, so it's really important to connect that to big picture, okay, especially if the audience is not in your field. Number two, the student did not work hard enough to engage the audience curiosity about their work, right? If you're passionate about the work, it should show, right? So try your best to do so, okay? And put yourself in the position of the audience. What would make you interested in what you're having to say? And if you can't answer that question, my guess is the audience can't either, and they might fall asleep after a few words. Okay, so really work at that engaging and keeping the audience attentive. 3, student neglected the visual component of the presentation. I have seen talks before where I've seen the slide, and after the talk, I still couldn't understand what that slide was there for. It didn't seem to relate to anything in the talk at all. I've also seen slides that were loaded with information, and no one really wanted that. In fact, you have a lot of the audience that's quite far away from your presentation. There was no way they could even read small print. Okay, so yeah, if you're going to use words, make them big and make them few, right? So be careful with that. But I'm just telling you that I think the trend has been just a picture, okay? Photograph, picture, no words at all, but it's something that is related to what the presentation's all about. 4th, Student didn't leave long enough room to practice the presentation, right? And a word, procrastination. Okay, that's what this one is. How long does it take to kind of get your presentation ready? Okay. It's nice if you have a full month. The way we're setting it up this semester, you should have a full month to work on these things. It may not take you all that long to kind of put together a script for this entire thing. But from there, work until you can get that thing memorized. We're going to see, I'm going to have some comments from a student. And one thing she mentions is you have conversations that go on in your head while you're trying to present. Okay. It's kind of noise that's distracting from what you're trying to do. You're kind of ready for a presentation when you don't hear those voices anymore, right? You know this talk so well that you don't have to even think about what's coming next, okay? And once you're there, you can do beautiful things with your talk because you can work on other elements of your talk, your voice inflection, your timing, okay? And it really doesn't come until you have, right, gone through enough practice where absolutely you just don't need notes at all anymore. Okay, last, student failed to demonstrate their enthusiasm for their topic, right? Some students, I think, one-on-one do a lot better, okay, but getting in front of an audience can kind of intimidate some, and they get overly serious, right? I think you have to be serious when it calls for it, but for the most part, if it's research stuff, you should show your passion and your enjoyment for what you're doing. Once again, if you're talking about death and going through a specific example of it, okay, maybe it's a relative that died, you probably shouldn't be laughing at that point in time. Okay, but, right, so stay consistent with what's there, but let your emotion show. I think it's really important in terms of selling the audience and keeping them interested. Okay, so I thought we'd look at a couple talks real quick, and so I can point out a few things in here. So when you look at these things, try your best to identify 6 parts of the presentation. This first example is really kind of nice and crystal clear. So I wanted you to take a look at it and see what you think, okay? But I think this really outlines the 6 ingredients well.
How many times have you seen a Peyton Manning make that inch-perfect pass and thought to yourself, wow, how did he do that? Or listen to Adele or Beyonce hit that perfect note that completely mesmerizes you. I've always wondered what makes certain people excel in their field and set them apart from others. As I was beginning to explore, to identify differences between experts and novices in different fields, aircraft pilot performance seemed the perfect fit. Did you know 80% of air crashes are caused due to pilot error? In 2009, an air crash led the Federal Aviation Administration to change a regulation on pilot recruitment. Instead of 250 hours, pilots now require 1,500 hours to pilot a commercial US carrier. This change in regulation clearly shows the importance of experience, flying hours, and most importantly, expertise in piloting an aircraft. This brings me to my primary research question. Are there significant differences between expert and novice pilots based on their brain activity? Now, I use an electroencephalographic or an EEG device to measure brain activity in expert and novice pilots. The recorded brain activity helps me understand the specific parts of the brain and the dominant cognitive processes while they are flying. Surprisingly, what I found was the expert pilots show significantly lesser brain activity than novice pilots, which is a direct result of more efficient brain usage. I believe these cognitive processes that are specific to expert pilots are integral to achieving expertise. Keeping focus on the specific parts of the brain, we can now develop better training tools and tests for novice pilots. This change will help in accelerating their progress from a novice to becoming an expert. Moreover, I also believe that this idea is not specific to pilots alone. We can use this research and extrapolate it to understand expert performance in so many other fields. So next time you see a Manning or a Beyonce perform, think of me. I might just know the secret.
Okay, in this second example, note how the speaker grabs the audience attention by acting out kind of various characters with her voice, which shows you some really wide range of vocal inflection, which I think is important to hold the audience's attention. Anyway, it was probably one of the more fascinating things of this talk. So here's another example. This is Megan Posey.
Parents and teachers have become increasingly concerned about girls following the 2006 advent of Facebook. It's been blamed for a rise in bullying and a decline in social skills. My research, however, takes a slightly different approach and looks at three things: grade 8 girls, identity, and Facebook's most commonly used feature, status updates. It's based on a simple and age-old premise. If all the world's a stage, then surely Facebook is just another stage on which actors can perform. And what do all actors want? Desirable reactions from their audiences. This involves trying a number of different strategies on for size. Should I present myself as kind, needy, self-sacrificial, talented, intimidating? So, dramaturgical metaphor in hand, I set about answering two questions. First, which of these strategies are grade 8 girls using in their status updates? And second, how and why are grade 8 girls using their status updates more broadly? I used a mixed methods approach, and 349 surveys, 9 interviews and 445 status updates later, I had some answers. I collected updates ranging from long weekend, yay, to piss off, to how do people just have sex with complete strangers? I can't even order pizza over the phone. And I coded these status updates according to the strategies these girls were using to present themselves. While you would expect that bullying and attention seeking would rate highly, they didn't. Girls most commonly presented themselves as likable by using flattery and compliments. And this is exactly what happens in offline settings. You see, girls need to maintain synergy between their online and offline identities. Why? Because everything you say on Facebook can be used against you in the court of social approval. When I asked the girls why they updated their own statuses, they said, just to let other people know what I'm doing if I'm bored. But when I asked them why other people updated their statuses, they said, she'll just do anything to get attention. She just wants the boys to like her. This might explain why more than 30% of the girls in my study reported updating their statuses at least once per day. Because status updates will be interpreted differently by every audience member, identities are in a constant state of flux. Identity becomes less a question of who am I and more a question of what do you see in me, what do you want in me. My research challenges the fearful notion of an authentic offline identity and an inauthentic online identity. It shows that, like the classroom, Facebook is just another space for girls to experiment with their identities and gauge the reactions of others. So, if there's one message we should be sending to grade 8 girls on Facebook, know your audience. Thank you.
Okay. Lastly, I like to think this is kind of a secret ingredient. Really tough to probably teach. Okay, so if you have any theater experts out there, I think this one is probably better handled within your department. Okay, but the secret ingredient, I would say, would be named presence, right? And it really is kind of your goal, I think, when you get out there to do any talk. So it has a number of ingredients, and we'll see those. But you want to speak with an awareness of how your audience is responding, right? So you really need to be aware of them. Unfortunately, if you haven't practiced your talk all that much, all you can hear, right, is your talk in front of you. You're not that aware of what the audience is doing at all, okay? Once you know your talk well, then you can really connect with your audience because you can look at their nonverbals and read them and respond accordingly. Okay. Second, you need to use body language consistent with your presentational goals. Move throughout the talk with authority and purpose. You're not allowed to run around the room or anything, but you can see through some of these talks. But yeah, you can walk back and forth in front of your presentation, and that's okay. Okay. Maximize your vocal expressiveness, right? Speak slowly, deeply, okay? And if there is an important thing that you're going to say, slow down, right? And really pronunciate that clearly so the audience catches it and knows its importance. Fourth, develop the content of your speech so that it will lead your audience to respond the way that you'd like them to, okay? So, I said, you are weaving a story in this talk, right? So you want your audience to follow along and be aware. When you look at it, is this a good story? Does it flow logically? We want your audience to almost beat you to the punchlines, right? Beat you to your research question. It would be great. And then fifth or last, right? You want to be comfortable with being in the spotlight. So if this is your first presentation, yeah, I can see it being kind of a scary phenomenon, but the more times you get in front of people, the better. So if you don't have an audience to practice on right away, right, have someone videotape you, right? And that will give you a certain amount of anxiety to begin with, but that's kind of a good starting point, right, to have the videotape. From there, you can probably go up to Grow and talk with them. They may be willing to help you gain a little audience in there. Maybe people in Grow would love to hear your talk if you want to practice on them. Okay, so just something to talk with Grow about if you are interested in needing a little more practice with an audience. Okay. So yeah, if you do master the art of presence, right? You should be passionate, comfortable, enthusiastic, confident, authentic, and captivating, right? You should have all these ingredients at the same time. And I'm just telling you, you probably can't get there until you've practiced your talk so much that it's just plain effortless for you to give this talk. Once you're there, you can work on all these elements, right, surrounding presence. So yeah, don't procrastinate. Don't wait till the last week to start practicing your performance, right? You want to do it earlier. Okay. So my last example is probably one of my favorites, okay? Because I think this student, Rosina Stevens, has got it, okay? You want to call it an it being presence in this case. So notice how she engages the audience and captures their attention throughout the entire talk. Although the talk's well planned out, she appears to just be having like this comfortable conversation with the audience rather than performing as a character in a performance, right? And I probably shouldn't even use that performance, right? These presentations almost become kind of conversations if you're doing them right. What's also interesting from this is you'll notice her slide was just a blank screen, okay? But it's done with a purpose, okay? So I just will tell you that before watching it.
It might seem as though I've started speaking with a blank PowerPoint slide behind me, but there are actually a bunch of things on this slide. You just can't see them yet. To your right is a Ferrari I drew myself in white. To your left is a soy latte in a white takeaway cup. And in the middle is a home, I drew myself in white, a home among the gum trees. Lots of plum trees, clothesline out back, veranda out front, and an old rocking chair. It's interesting how you can't see things when the context they're surrounded by makes them seem invisible. Suddenly this slide full of nothing is full of white stuff. You just needed help to see it. Here's something else you can't see. This slide is actually a black slide with a white rectangle pasted over the top of it. Over 200 years ago, white people arrived and settled over the top of already established Aboriginal life. And colonisation happens today, the settled way we are encouraged to live, the ways we are encouraged to learn and consume, how often we are encouraged to wash, and the ways we think about and use nature are actually pretty white. People who fit into this society are taught to think of it as normal and awesome, but if you don't fit in, whiteness is very visible because it can be depressingly inescapable. Aboriginal and black academics and activists are suggesting that one of the first steps toward creating a more equal and considerate society is for white people today to identify and understand the dominance of our culture. From there, we can challenge how, in modern Australia, one way of life smothers another. But it's difficult to challenge something if you've been taught not to see it. Is a job white? Is a house white? Is organic gluten-free food white? If I fall into the vortex of cat videos on YouTube and I'm wearing my pajamas, am I just procrastinating or am I white procrastinating? My research is about understanding what whiteness looks like and how it works. I'm collecting and analysing Aboriginal accounts of feeling unwelcome, ignored, and misunderstood in society. And from that material, I'm piecing together a picture of white Australia that we can begin to debate. My thesis is a novel. The plot is a secret, but this conversation needs to be communicated well beyond the walls of a university. My hope is that research in this field will point toward a more equal, considerate, and respectful Australia that is so much more than just white.
In addition to her talk, Rosina Stevens also has recorded some tips for putting together your slides and things from 3MT, and just a few tips for giving your talks. Thought it was interesting enough to kind of include them here. So here they are.
Hi, my name is Susanna Stevens. I'm the winner of the ANU 3-minute thesis competition and runner-up and People's Choice in the Trans-Tasman 3-minute thesis competition for 2014. And I'm a student here at ANU in the School of Archaeology and Anthropology, and I'm within the interdisciplinary and cross-cultural research program here at ANU. I'm here to give you my 3 top tips for getting the most out of your 3-minute thesis experience. So, my first tip, think about your slide. When I spoke, I had a blank slide, and it wasn't for no reason. When you get up there and you're speaking, you want to make sure that 3 minutes that you have are as exciting and informative as possible. And one of the best ways that you can do that is by making sure that you really think about what's on the slide behind you. Don't just have a pretty picture because. Make sure that what you have behind you is helping explain what you're doing in a way that maybe your words can't. So, for example, with my blank slide, I really wanted to communicate that the audience couldn't necessarily see something that I wanted them to. And through that concept, I was able to communicate a lot more about my research. Great things to include on a slide might be diagrams, funny pictures that do relate to what you're doing. An illustration of what you're talking about can really, really help the audience go that extra step in understanding what you're talking about in a really useful way that helps convince them that what you're doing is really interesting. Tip 2, change or save the world. That might sound like a really big thing to do, but the 3-minute thesis is a really great time to check in with yourself about why you're doing your research and how it's important to you, but also how it might be important to the broader community. Remember that you're doing the 3-minute thesis because you're communicating your research to a lay audience. And a lay audience want to understand why you're passionate about what you're talking about. So sit down and think about how your research isn't necessarily changing everybody's lives, but is changing the world in a way. So, for example, with my research, I'm writing a novel. Sure, that's my thesis. But on top of that, I'm actually wanting to interrogate the way that society functions to create a better sense of equality culturally and racially in Australia. And when you talk about your research in those terms, the audience can suddenly relate to what you're talking about in a new way that helps them shed light on why what you're doing is so weighted and vital and why you're passionate about it in the first place. Tip 3. In the words of a famous Disney princess, let it go. Letting it go might sound like a really difficult thing to do, but when you get up on that stage and you've done all of that preparation leading up to you speaking, you want to be able to get up there and make sure that there isn't an extra dialogue going on in your head, and it's really hard to stop that voice. People do the 3-minute thesis for all kinds of reasons. They do it because they're competitive. They do it because they like speaking. They do it because they want to challenge themselves to become better at communicating their research. Or in the case of me, I really wanted to make sure that my research was answerable to a broader audience and that they felt like they could talk about it to me. So when you get up there, no matter which reason you're engaging with to get up on that stage, you need to make sure that in that moment you rely on all of the practice that you've done and you just let it go. Enjoy the experience, and that's really hard to do, but a great way of practicing that is to use a space. Imagine that you are getting up in front of an audience. Imagine that there are lights on you. Close your eyes for a minute and then pretend that you really are starting it for the first time and there is no going back. You'll find that you will actually make a lot of mistakes that you didn't think that you were going to make in the first place, but also this surprising experience is going to mean that when it comes to getting up on that stage, you really can just let it go.
So much more than just white.
Okay, so kind of final comments. All good presentations should do a number of things, right? So you should engage the audience, right? Remember, there's a People Choice Award. Actually, the audience is going to vote on third place, at least in some of these competitions they do. And explicitly connect the research to the real world, right? That big picture is really kind of important. Some more obvious things, right? Speak clearly and comprehensively, right? Remember, the audience does not speak the discipline's language, so stay away from that academic language. Choose your words wisely, right? Choose active verbs, right? Shorter words, sentences, they'll work better in this case. Avoid the jargon, acronyms. Pace yourself and find your own rhythm. Just another one of those things you can't do until you've practiced and practiced and practiced. So consciously, right, slow your talking speed. You'll find when you get in front of an audience or in front of a camera, you'll start speeding up tremendously. So practice your material and delivery often. Familiarity with your script and topic will help the presentation flow more naturally and easy. There is no secret to getting there. It's really practice, practice, practice to allow you to do really kind of put those final touches and special touches on your talk. Okay. Just note, as I mentioned before, you can check out tons of video presentations of 3MT from around the world. You can go through the official 3minutethesis.org site, or you can check out other universities in the US because so many are now having these competitions. So grab the YouTube or Google 3MT winners or just 3MT talks at different universities and take a look at what those look like as well, right? I am confident if you go in there, it's very well worth looking at a bunch of these winners. Okay, so do not procrastinate. Start preparing today, right? And there's no secret here, right? Practice makes perfect. But I just want to emphasize the point that, after you practice, I think there's a lot more that you can actually do to improve your talk, right? But you can't do any of those things, right? Work on presence and things until you have that talk down, right? So plan accordingly. All right, so finally, if you need some assistance or you want some feedback on your talk, you need a place to practice, Okay, we're always happy to help students prepare for 3MT at Grow. So do not hesitate to contact us at Grow. So the Grow Suite office is located in the library, room 220 on the second floor. Our phone number over here is 825-2507. Give us a call, and you're welcome to contact me. Feel free. I am more than happy to talk with you about these things, but start with faculty in your area as well. I'm sure a lot of them would love to give you advice in terms of these talks. Okay. And just to end, I wish you the best in putting this presentation together. If I can be of any assistance in the future, do not hesitate.